Tel Aviv International students in Hebron. Actually, inside the Tomb of the Patriarchs and Matriarchs is a room, and we sat there and answered questions about the real issues, about the makeup of Israel, about the future of the conflict, etc., etc. So here we go. Let's call this the tad more political of a discussion. Not overly, we're still in a religious side, but we'll just get a little maybe political perspective. First thing is that, as I was hinting at before, solutions. Let's not kid ourselves that we can figure out solutions so quickly and easily, that we can come from different places and understand what needs to be done here. Let's check that at the door. We don't always have solutions, and things are complex, and there's a lot of history here, and there's religious complexities and historical complexities. It's not something you could solve by saying, let's just do this and that, and where history doesn't matter and religion doesn't matter. I get that a lot of times, that people are like, these things don't matter. All that matters is human rights and things like that. That's a non-regional way of talking about things. So that's number one. Number two is that I just want to give you a thought about how people like myself understand what the state of Israel is, and then you'll understand what Hebron is. Okay? How do we understand Israel? I understand that Israel exists on three pillars, stands on three pillars. One pillar is the Bible. Now, you guys might think that the Bible is meaningful, or you might think it's meaningless. And I can understand that. But for us, the Bible is meaningful. Also, the Bible is also a book of our history as much as it's a book of our religion. And so, to us, we think of this place, it has tremendous meaning in the biblical story, Hebron. And Israel has tremendous meaning in the biblical story. And then, in the biblical story, it was meaningful to other people. So, there were many people that made international policy based on the history of the Bible. Just now, we celebrated 100 years since the mandate for Palestine made by the League of Nations. That was based on Jewish people's historical connection to this land, which was based on the Bible. And by the way, our archaeology, the science of archaeology, backs up our claims that we're from here. You want to call us an occupier, but anywhere I throw a stone, I dig there, I find Jewish artifacts from 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. It's a little bit funny to call somebody an occupier like that. It's like, we're from here. It's a little bit, we're different because we left and came back and all that, but we don't see ourselves as foreigners in this land. So that's number one. No, so the Bible and archaeology and history and international law is one. Two is nation state. Which one of you folks thinks that they live in a nation state? Which state is that? Germany. Is it a nation state these days?
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, right? Because Germany, like a Western European country, is on the one hand a German country and was really created by Germanic tribes that came together. But on the other hand, today, it acts like it welcomes everybody in, and it acts like it's a total democracy. So I get confused about how I understand what Germany is today, as opposed to, for example, like a Poland, which is clear to me that Poland is a nation state. I'm asking you, I'm not stating, I'm asking.
I don't understand.
So what's going on?
Nation state means that the majority of the population is of a certain nationality or ethnicity, and that it identifies itself as a place that wants to protect, defend, and raise up that nation's language, national character, maybe religion, as opposed to in America, which is not a nation state. America is a state for whoever shows up there and gets American citizenship, right? The Czech Republic has got its own language, its own people, and I don't know what the numbers are, but it's very much a majority Czech. Ukraine certainly.
And Denmark also.
Denmark certainly.
So we could
That's
say,
why it's a little bit funny to me when sometimes they don't always know that they live in a nation state that is really interested in national, not just ethnic but cultural, national unity. Any case, but not all countries are like that. For example, England today is not like that.
No.
Where's our British friend? Yeah, it's not anymore really. Maybe it was.
What's the value of the distinction?
Very, very important. It's very, very important. Because, because the reason it's important is because once you identify something as a nation state, you understand that there are sometimes threats to that ethnic grouping. And so, as I was saying before, the Kurds are an ethnic group that have created an autonomous, it's called nation state. And then in general, the beautiful idea of rebirth, the birth of nations, or Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and the idea of self-determination, that's very important. That's very much based on ethnic peoples living on their ancestral land with their calendar, with their culture, and they're like, what they understand is they're like the land that they came from. Now, when you live in America, I can tell you as living in America, they don't have a sense of that at all. They're not from America. They don't think that way. You're not from an ancient land that you're not like in India or a Persia, or it's a different relationship. It's a different relationship to a piece of land. It's just a different relationship. In America, you buy a piece of land, there it is, good, but you're not like, my peoplehood is from here. You're like, my peoplehood is Irish or Italian, American. It's just a different thing. And so the reason I say that is because stage 2 of what Israel is, the pillar of what Israel is that it's a nation state. A nation state of the Jewish people in a small parcel of land. And so the democracy aspect of it is secondary to the first most important principle, which is this is an ethnic national state defending its peoplehood and its landmass. And it's not here to necessarily give everybody rights and equalities. No. If you want rights and equalities, there are your nation states, that are ready to take you in, and supposedly you're supposed to get your, I'm not sure I want to give you total equality to decide on the nature of the state. Somebody tell me now, okay, maybe Friday is the holy day of Israel. Oh, no. It's a Jewish nation state. That's what we want. We want the character on our ancient land. We want the calendar, we want the Jewish calendar, we want the Hebrew language, etc. It's very, very important. With respect, I say this. Sometimes when we come from countries that are non-nation state, we don't always understand the value of it. I'm not being dissonant. I'm being honest with you. I'm, as a person who comes from America, I could tell you, and even more like a Canada, which is a country which really does not have that consciousness, for good and for bad. For good and for bad. There's something very beautiful about living in Canada in that, you can have dual loyalties. Nobody cares if you love Korea. The biggest Asian population outside of Asia is in Canada. And there's something nice about that. There's something nice. And Brooklyn, who's from Brooklyn? Where's our friend from Brooklyn? Okay, there's something very beautiful about Brooklyn being a super multi-ethnic, you could be on the playground with Chinese, Koreans, blacks, Jews. It's cool. There's something cool about that. But there's something to be understood about ethnic states. By the way, you're from UK, right? From England. Right. But right north of you is Ireland, which for all its extremely proud and haughty attitudes about Israel and stuff like that, about what we should or should not be, they are an ethnic state. 98% Irish people. I say to them, if you love Palestinians so much, where does your there's Palestinian expats all over the world. Where's your love for them? Why don't you create some if you think that they're being where's it? No. We like our ethnic purity in our country, but you guys should do the X, Y, and Z. You can see I have a little chip on my shoulder. In any case, the second pillar of Israel is that it's an ethnic national state. The third pillar is that it's a Middle Eastern country. It's a Middle Eastern country with Middle Eastern codes of behavior. Honor means a lot around here. Being tough and being able to show strength means a lot around here. If you are weak and the other tribes sense that you're willing to give up on your land, that you're not going to make a big deal out of something, that you're not willing to say absolutely not, you're not willing to walk out of negotiations with your luggage and say, I'm out of here. If you're not like that, then they sense that you're a bit of a Western style sissy. You don't get the rules of engagement, and then you start to get pushed out. Israel's a Middle East country. It has to behave in ways that are Middle Eastern. When the Jordanians understood that the PLO was a problem for them, the same Palestinian Authority, which is now the PLO, what do? And I think 72, was it? They killed 5,000 of them and exiled them, you know what I mean? Just recently, Mohammed bin Salman had one day where they caught a lot of ISIS folks and other folks. They beheaded 83 people in one day. Beheaded! 83 people. The world didn't say anything because they are a Middle Eastern country. And you say, do you really want to be like that? Well, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think that it's important to be a little bit more like this region, because if not, you get walked all over around here. You got to be tough around here. That's just the way it is. And you can all day long be want to come in and be all nice and, and democratic and pleasant, but it's not the way it works around here, and you have to know that. And within that third pillar is the pillar of Israeli defense. Israel is a defense country. It's a defense country. It's a defense-minded country. We're also a post-Holocaust country. which means, again, it's part of the same thing. We're a defense country. We know what it means to be undefended. We don't like that idea anymore. And so therefore, we are a armed minority as our ethos. That's part of the ethos, is a fighting armed minority sense. We're not the only ones in the world that are like that. There's many peoples, for example, even the Druze are like a tough, fighting minority. And there's other ones like that in the world. So that's part of the ethos. These are the three, one second, I'll answer you right now. The three pillars of Israel are A, the Bible, which means also history, archaeology. B, nation state, an ethnic national state. And C, Middle Eastern country with its defensive needs.
So democracy's not...
Democracy is a value, but it's not a pillar.
So just going back to the idea of like nation state, ethnicity, I'm not arguing that Jewish people should have a homeland or that there's an obvious claim to this specific land for the Jewish people. But I guess my question is, acknowledging there was the interim period, thousands of years, where Jewish people weren't here, the reality of the world is much messier than us being divided into these, this is mine, this is yours. We can take India, great example. The Muslim empire, the Mughal empire, built the Taj Mahal. So now there's a lot of Muslims who live in India. Who has claim to India? Is it the Hindus, or what about the Muslims who lived there for a really? So it feels like in reality, there's so much crisscrossing that I guess the people who are living here in the interim, what's their tie to the land then? Isn't it the same that Jewish people would have as well?
Okay, I think it's a great question and an important question. I think that the answer actually boils down to I am a believer in reducing things to simpler models. I agree with everything you said. And there's no doubt that other peoples have a tie to this land. There's no doubt about it. But, in fact, there has never been a different state here, a different capital here. There's been, basically it was a backwater of the Ottoman Empire, of Syria, Palestina, different names at different times. But there was never a thing here that made it into, there was no Palestine. That's a modern invention. There was no ancient Palestinians, that didn't exist. There were various peoples, if they were the Turks, or if they were Mamluks, Egyptians, Crusaders, Arabs from Saudi Arabia, and then before that, Byzantines from Constantinople, and before that, Rome. A lot of people controlled this land. So what do we say? We say that there's no question that some Arabs have a tie to this land. But we say we're talking about here is civil rights as opposed to national rights. I don't have any problem with Arabs having civil rights in my country. I want them to have civil rights in my country, as long as they're non-jihadist. As long as they're non-jihadist. Then I say, welcome. You have right to your house, you have right to basic decencies and democratic values, not full democracy, democratic values, freedoms, liberties.
How do you define, what's the difference?
Because I think today we've smushed together a lot of stuff and we call it democracy. Democracy has many different forms. What's important to me is the democratic principles of freedom of expression, freedom of liberties, rights to property, rights to travel, rights to own your property. Freedom of speech is maybe one of the main ones. And so that's, I think, what democracy is about. It's not necessarily one person, one vote. That's a form of it, but that's not the heart of it, is the liberty aspect. In any case, my point to you is that Arabs will have civil rights, but not necessarily full democratic voting rights of equality where they can vote me out, because that would be silly. So that's my point to you, is that yes, I do recognize that there are people's connection. And more than that, I'm going to say another way to you, which is even deeper, which is, let's say you're a Druze. You are not Jewish. You speak Arabic. But you respect Israel. And you want to be a loyal, if not loving, but loyal citizen of the state. Fine. But you're part of not part of our ethnicity, but part of our nation. Because amongst the nation, there's also other peoples that come with us. If you're a non-jihadist and you're of that Arab or other minorities, of course, just have your civil rights first and foremost. Maybe have allegiance or loyalty to the Jewish state of Israel, and you should live as a well-adjusted, successful minority. If, on the other hand, you are actually a fifth column, a jihadist with ideology to destroy Israel, if somebody says to you, when did the occupation begin? And you go, 1948, and means you want to get rid of Israel in toto, then no, you don't have to live here, even if you have a claim to the land.
So I'm curious because, like, kind of regarding Kay's question, your answer to that, like, you recognize kind of like the nation of like the Arabs in Israel and in broader Palestine. But how are you juxtapose that with, say, like the democratic values? Like, what would be the point of like the first pillar, like archaeology, like you mentioned, the shared history, the Bible? So because they also have that history here, but
no, they don't have that. That's exactly the point. They don't have that.
Okay, they don't. They have a history here. Is what I'm saying. Not
And
necessarily stemming from the Bible, but
and not
that's
necessarily
stemming
from deep. Short history, relatively.
1,300 years. That's long.
1,300 years were all of Islam, but they were of various kinds for various people. They're all gone. There's no more Mamluks. The Turks who are in Turkey. You know what I mean? They don't control here. There was no Palestinian thing. There was Arabs that lived here, but they don't have any. It's a completely different kind of thing. And the majority of Arabs that are here are actually here because of Zionism, because this was a place where there was work, and so there was a lot of migration.
There were Palestinians, like the Babylonians destroyed the temple, they renamed it Palestine.
The Romans renamed it Palestine.
To erase the connection of the Jews to the land.
Yeah.
So it was called Palestine, there were Palestinians.
Well, they weren't self-identified Arab Palestinians.
Also, what I'm saying is, like you mentioned, anywhere you throw a rock, there's going to be Jewish history. There's also Arab and Muslim history as well.
There is Arab and Muslim history. There's no doubt about it. But first thing, let's distinguish that it was as a conquest. In the last, Islam is a conquest religion by its own definition, and so it conquered, and then it got unconquered. That's the nature of conquest. That's number one. Number two is that, I don't deny there's Arab history. That would be silly, but I don't deny it at all. I do deny if somebody says I have a superior right of self-determination in this land. I'm like, no, you don't. Nobody's got a superior right of self-determination in this land. You may have had property here, may have had history here, but you never had a capital here, you never had a state here. There's always backwater for you. This is our ancestral land, and we are the holders of the superior claim, and we're going to defend that claim.
Why is it superior to name when that thing?
It's superior for many reasons.
Yeah.
Many reasons, but let me just finish this question.
That was my only point on the shared history.
Okay, and that's what she said. Okay, that's what she said, and I don't deny that there's history here, but I certainly deny the self-determination value of that history.
Would you also say that there's like a Palestinian now nation state here in Israel or in Palestine?
First thing, I don't believe that there's a Palestine. That's just me. Okay, I believe that there's an area ruled today by a thuggish gang called the PA, which suppresses decent basic rights, tortures people. That even the UN had to be like, all right, let's talk about Palestinian torture of prisoners. They were like, finally. So I don't believe that there's a nation state here. I believe there's a big ethnic group here. There's an ethnic grouping here. That ethnic grouping has come here, and that is a problem for me. But there is a big ethnic grouping here. That is true. But I wouldn't call them a nation state. I would say inside of the borders of historic Israel, there's a large minority of Arabs today.
What characterizes them not as a nation state? Where say
they
have shared history? I'm just asking.
Yeah.
They have a shared value, they have history, they share language. I'm just wondering.
They have a shared language of the 22 Arab countries around them. They have a shared history. Many of their last names are Al-Masri from Egypt and other names like that say that they've really come. They don't have a shared history on this land. They have a shared now created, like a sports team. They now share the same flag and share the same thing, but it is really, in the way I understand it, is it's mostly an attack on the nation states. It's like replacement theology. There's a replacement narrative. That if you, I can show you pictures of what the kids here, the Arab kids sell here. They sell pictures of what is exactly the borders of the state of Israel with the flag of Palestine. So what they're calling for is to replace Israel through what many Arab leaders have said, that Palestine was created in order to be a contra to Israel. I don't think that it's a real deep shared values and heritage and history. I think it's an Islamic Ummah-style shared history, and much of it is a war effort to replace Israel. That's how I understand it. I understand that Palestine is the attacker against Israel. Okay? Yeah, but there were some other questions. Yeah, did you want one answered it? Go. Yes.
I don't know if this is a question. It's more, I think you're talking about...
Just make it sound like a question with the question mark at the end, and that'll be a question.
No, I just think that you're talking about the issue is that ethnocracy, meaning that it's one ethnic group that are controlling the majority or in the controlling apparatus. I think that's what you're meaning, right?
Well, I mean, I certainly wish it wasn't like that. And that what you're describing is Bahrain. Bahrain is a Sunni minority controlling the Shia. First thing, we're still the vast majority here. We're still 70%.
Exactly.
So that's...
Democracy is a democracy. It's just where the majority ethnic group, by virtue of being the majority, controls the ethnic character of the state.
Well, I wouldn't be against that designation necessarily, but I'll tell you that I'll give you some examples of how that boils down to actual real life. For example, I did write a New York Times article on this, which is 5 alternatives to a 2-state solution.
I think I sent it to the group.
Yeah, there's different ways of thinking about this, but I'll give you an example. Let's say Hebron here, would be an Arab city that everybody here had Israeli residency, but it would still stay an Arab city with an Arab mayor, with Arab courts, and they'd have their, let's call it, a Palestinian character. But they would vote, or whatever they do, to raise up their muhtars and their mayors and stuff like that within. But they would all be Israeli residents. But you would, as a Jew, not be afraid to walk in there. And there would be no jihadism because that would not be tolerated. But they would have like a Chinatown, if you will, within the small state of Israel. So they're an ethnic group respected, with opportunities, with their ways of doing it. Now remember this very important principle, which oftentimes is forgotten. There is not one Arab democracy. Not one. And so before we are like, the Arabs want the vote. No. In the countries that they control, there's not one of them that they have voting of any kind to speak of. And one of you smart Alex may say to me, Tunisia. Yes, Tunisia's a little bit different, but Tunisians are actually not exactly Arabs and whatever, so forget about it. The point is, Lebanon is a country that has this... Lebanon is one of the most failed states in the world, A. B, it's a failed, horrific... There's killing there, there's inflation of millions of percent, it's like... Forget it. And the voting there, the history of the voting there, anytime any ethnic group got the right to vote more, they were knocked off by the other ethnic group. Lebanon is a great example of what not to do. Don't be like, okay, we're all here together, so screw it. Everybody gets to vote, and I'll be fine. It's like, let's mush these people together in a room, and it's fine, it'll work out. That's exactly what the Americans, in their stupidity, did in Iraq. They're like, it's fine. Let's just bring them all together. The Shiites, the Sunnis, the Kurds. It's going to be fine because it's fine in Brooklyn, so it'll be fine, in Baghdad. It's fine. It'll be fine. Such sheer haughtiness and stupidity. You cannot force warring clans and warring religions into one room and then think that with the American hocus pocus you could make it into a peaceful place. Lebanon was, when I was a small child, a Garden of Eden. It was a Christian state. Okay, that's what it was. It was a Garden of Eden, a small, one of the only Christian states around here. Are there any Christian states today in the Middle East? No, there are not, because Lebanon was destroyed basically by Shiite proxies, by Christian weakness, etc., etc., etc. Point is that Lebanon is a great example of how to undo a state by mushing everybody together and just doing the democracy hocus pocus, like Rumsfeld thought about Iraq. That was not the way to get things done. Rumsfeld had a and I like him in terms of he's a funny guy, but like had he had an understanding of the Middle East, he would have been like Iraq, 4 zones, cut them up. Here's Kurdistan, here's Shiiteville, here's Sunni-stan, and here's Christian, whatever. Here's the Yazidis and the Christians, and here you go, and do a nice separation of peoples, little India-Pakistan action, and maybe a little Turkey Greeks. Separation of peoples. That's how they used to do it. Yeah, when the world had guts, so they would separate peoples out and be like, look, you're not going to get along. You're going to ethnically cleanse one another all the time. So here you go. You go to Greece and you go to Turkey, and it works better that way. And of course, the Arabs, when the Jewish state was announced, they were like, oh yeah? Get out. And they kicked out almost 1 million Jews from Arab countries. And what we should have done is probably kicked out the Arabs that didn't want to respect our nation state and say, you guys go to your 22 countries or stay here, but be loyal citizens of Israel. Now, these things might sound harsh, and they are. They really are harsh. They really are very harsh, but they're the way things work. Instead of the mosh pit of endless conflict that we have here. You had a question. Go ahead.
I was just wondering,
with respect.
just kind of as far as the way that you live your daily life in this city, next to Palestinians, you have a 13-year-old daughter.
14 now,
14.
Yeah.
That's an age and a half of a 14-year-old sister.
Yeah.
Do you encourage her to build relationships with Palestinians? Do you ever see each other on the streets? If she was like, met this, I don't know, is there any interaction between them?
Yeah.
Do you encourage that friendship? Like, what is that like?
Yeah, very good question. And so, first thing is she grows up knowing that her bat mitzvah had that aspect in it. Just that. Another thing is I'm always, doing my best. For example, tomorrow was scheduled to be, but it got canceled because of the heat, a cleanup between Jews and Arabs. I'm part of an organization called Habayit, run by my friend Ninon Dan Kahati, and we actually do Arab-Jewish interchange, and we were supposed to do a cleanup right above the Tomb of the Patriarchs and Matriarchs over there. It got canceled because of the heat, and I was going to bring my kids into that. We're going to do Palestinians and Israelis, Jews, cleaning up apart, and we honor our joint father together. So yes, on the one hand, there is 100% an effort to teach them not to hate.
What language do you guys speak in Arabic? With each other?
With Arabs?
Yeah. Like, do they...
Hebrew or English? Hebrew or English. And some of us know Arabic, and that's always good. By the way, P.S., I'll give you an example, just parenthetically. If I was the boss of this country, one of the first things I would do is I would mandate the study of Arabic as a mandatory language in Israel. Like everybody, and you go to the Europeans, and they like speak 3, 4, 5 languages, like the Belgians. They speak like 5 languages. My Belgian friends speak Flemish, Yiddish, English, Hebrew, and French. And it's like, you're like, wow, And the Dutch also speak, they just speak it well too. They speak it really well. They speak English well.
So in your education system here,
they speak Hebrew and English.
So you don't have any Arabic?
Not, it was the Israeli left that actually turned that off. Ironically, it's very funny. And I'm not going to go deeply into this, and you may understand what I'm saying or not, but just on a very tight level, I'll say to you, the Israeli left are actually, generally speaking, they don't like Arabs. The Israeli right, like myself, we are actually more like Arabs and feel more connected to the Arab way. And so the Israelis, a lot of times, the Israeli left, they want to separate away from Arabs. But we don't want to separate it. We don't need that separation. So for us, I want my child to speak Arabic. I would like her to speak Arabic and understand the Arab ways. I actually think that'll make her into a better Israeli and better Middle Easterner if she understands the ways. And in Tel Aviv, they want to understand the ways of southern France. And we want to understand the ways of the Middle East here. You understand?
So the school system here is not implemented by the community, but by the Israeli state, and therefore...
It's by state.
Okay, therefore it's controlled.
The state basically. And therefore, but they don't teach Arabic seriously. I think it's a big mistake. I would teach Arabic very seriously. And then I promise you our policy would change also, because we would understand a lot of the BS that we're being sold. When you speak the Arabic, you understand the language, and you understand how it works. Yeah.
Wait, sorry, just back to my question. Does your daughter have...
So she doesn't have... Thank you. And I was going to say, but on the other hand, I don't want to BS you.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm teaching them to, love Palestine, Palestinians, and the whole thing. No. We have a conflict here. My daughter has to be careful when she walks the streets of Jerusalem or whatever it is. I have to teach her to be careful. She just finished her black belt in Taekwondo. That's right. And very proud, actually. And I certainly am not teaching her to be all about love and acceptance. She has to know that Arabs have an impressive culture. She has to understand it. She can have acquaintances, friends, collegiate relationships. She has to not be afraid of them culturally and physically. But it's not like we have a lot of Arab friends. I have some.
Yeah.
We have some. I have a very serious relationship with Ashraf Jabri here and others. But it's
Do they ever mix in schools, or do they?
No.
do a good job? No.
there are some very few places that try that, but no.
They're pretty close like that.
And it's very hard to mix them. And with respect, the Arab world wants to A, learn in Arabic, and B, learn Islamic ways.
Sure.
And the Jewish people want to learn in Hebrew and learn Jewish ways. So it's not really. There are all kinds of efforts to mix. Again, I'm involved with it. Here I am, an ultra right-winger guy,
Right.
and I'm involved in normalization efforts all the time.
Right.
And I speak to sometimes lefties who say to me all kinds of things, like, you should do that. I say to them, I am involved in, once a month I have interfaith and intercultural meetings with Arabs and try to find normalization and efforts. Like, I have more under my belt of trying to find common ground with Arabs than any, of these, so-called two-state folks and all that.
And you find that the mixing works? That you
Sure,
do those projects?
sure, of course. There is you definitely learn a lot. You definitely understand better. Sure. I am comfortable with Arabs.
Yeah.
Culturally speaking, I'm comfortable with their way. It's more than comfortable. It's part of the way. It's
Right.
part of this region.
Right.
And some of my Tel Aviv type friends, they are not comfortable with Arabs
Because they're not around them.
because they're not around them, and because they're more, how should I say,
European.
So then
Huh?
that,
European.
yeah.
So then that said, would you say that like a step towards peace would be kind of more integration efforts and normalization? Like it almost kind of sounds like
A little
what
bit,
America
a little
was
bit,
like
a
between
little
white
bit,
and
yes.
black people, and
Oh,
they weren't mixing.
yeah.
And so there was a lot of othering, and so do you think that step to progress is sort of being just normalizing sharing spaces?
A lot of peace organizations do that.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it doesn't yield anything. Truth of the matter is that peace here, from my perspective, is through a clear sense of boundaries. This is my land. You will not encroach on this land. You will not teach jihadism in your mosques. If you want to teach jihadism, it's not going to work here. Go to Qatar. Okay? It's not going to work here. And we're badass. And you will not be messed with in our little ethnic national bubble. And when you speak like that, people respect you. This is Jerusalem. I'm not dividing Jerusalem in half or anything like that. When you say you're dividing in half, that triggers a thing like, these guys are weak. I've spoken to Arabs many times who tell me, how do I speak with Arabs? I say to them the following, and I'll get your question, that's it. When I speak to Arabs, I always say to them, Allah loves you. He's given you 22 countries, 400 million children, oil coming out of the ground. Allah loves you. But this land, He gave to us. And it's even in your Quran that this land is ours. And look, with your own eyes, you could see that Allah defends us. Since in all the wars that you attacked us, we always beat you. And we were always smaller than you. We were always poorer than you. How did we beat you? It's the will of Allah. And people are like, whoa. And then they come back to me always with, yeah, but you have given up the Sinai. You have walked out of South Lebanon. You're barely in Judea and Samaria and on the Temple Mount. You ran out of Gaza. You're shrinking. And Allah is with us and we are patient. That is what I just gave you now is a honest to God rendition of thousands of conversations that I've had. And so when you talk two-state solution, the signal is, okay, these guys are leaving and we'll get them down the line. We'll get them. And whenever you give up 1 inch of ground, because ground is sacred, they understand that as weakness and it empowers their jihad. When you crush their jihad, when you say to them, these are the rules, and if you don't play nice, you're out of here, then they're like, this guy's serious, we respect him. And we can actually work with this guy. That's the Middle East. That's the way the Middle East thinks. Yes, ma'am.
Sort of a two-part question. Firstly, you were just, in the way you're speaking, do you therefore see the future for Israel being all-inclusive of Judea and Samaria, or do you see any possibility of a two-state solution? And then my second question is, what is your engagement with the international community, and also what do you think the international community gets wrong about their understanding of, those that live here in Hebron, those that live in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria? Like, what does the international community not really understand?
Certainly, I work against the two-state solution and am an enemy of the two-state solution and am doing my utmost to stop any such ideology. We don't want our New Jersey-sized land taken like Gaza was and then turned into a jihad forward base to destroy the rest of Israel. That was dumb. And we're against that. And many people that meet me on the airplane are just like, why would you give your land to your enemies? Like simple people just like on the plane talking to me. And like, I think that's absolutely correct. Why would you give your land away to your enemies? That's just dumb. And it doesn't work. And it only has created, did it create peace? Giving away Gaza? Of course not. So that's one. Regarding to the international community, the first thing they get wrong is their obsession with Israel. Why are you so obsessed with this? There's so many worse places of issues in this world. It's such a joke. It's like you're so, and that obsession, they don't want to face it. Like, why are you so obsessed? What is your deal? Let's say if I was Germany, I'd be like, I think that we should declare neutrality about Israel issues. That's what I would do if I was Germany. I'd be like, let's as a state decide that we got some messy history. Let's just like not. Because there's other places in the world to worry about, like Ukraine, Russia, and a million other things. Let's just like not deal with Israel because of our checkered history. Let's just like not. But no, there's like an obsession. There's an obsession, like we got to get involved. We got to, sometimes for good, oftentimes for bad. I would just not. And I ask sometimes, especially European folks, like and the American style State Department Euro type folks, like, what is your deal? Like, why are you so? What is your like? What it drives you to be so concerned about this? There's so many other things. And really, our situation is kind of stable, relatively. If you just look at the numbers, look at the situation, it's kind of stable. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, of course, the language of occupation is absurd. This was our land in history. This was a land decided at the League of Nations. This was our land after we won it in the Six-Day War in a defensive war. We purchased much of this land, et cetera, et cetera. We have good title to this land. So what the hell are you talking about occupation? Just like, we have something called the Israeli territories. That's what Judea and Samaria is. The West Bank is the Israeli territories. So let's just call it that. America's got territories like Puerto Rico, with 2 million folks living in Puerto Rico that do not have full democratic equalities. Do not have full democratic. Do Puerto Ricans vote for congressmen and senators? No, they do. They do.
They vote for non-voting.
Non-voting, exactly. Yes. So they have a very important distinction. They vote for. One second. That's right. They have congressmen and senators, but they are non-voting. So they're there, they represent, and they say their thing, but they don't have the same vote. Mm-hmm. Wow, the greatest democracy in the world.
They don't pay taxes.
Huh?
They don't pay taxes.
Fine. That's a good point. That's a very good point. And I have a millionaire friend who moved over to Puerto Rico. He's like, I don't care to vote. I just want you to get off my money. And
they voted for non-taxation.
Fine. I'm not saying that Palestine is Puerto Rico. I'm saying that even in the great democracy of the United States, there are different systems at play. There's a territory. Why? By the way, what danger do Puerto Ricans bring to the United States? The Puerto Rican what is going to take over America? Nothing. There's no danger.
Prefer the status quo Commonwealth.
Right. But they bring no danger to the United States whatsoever. They are hardworking, good people. But the Palestinians, much of them have a jihadism in their ideology. And so there's a danger. My point is that, folks should check themselves and check why they're still so, frankly, so colonialist in their thinking and so obsessed with Israel. What is your problem? And B, there are other solutions. The two-state solution is not going to happen. And C, we're not occupying our ancestral land. That's not true legally, historically, et cetera, et cetera. And we have some issues to work out, and we're going to work them out, inshallah, as we say right now. Okay, guys, yes, last question.
So I recently attended a talk by Ambassador Jacob Friedman, who's the ambassador under Trump to Israel, and he was saying, which I definitely understood his point. Sort of what you were saying is that there needs to be clarity, and that Israel often lets decisions happen to it instead of playing an active role and having an active vision as to what is the future of this country. And so my question for you is, if you had a magic wand and you could kind of create that clarity, realistically, because there are, Palestinians who live here, and there is the international community that you have to account for, and secular Israelis, and people who
want democracy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think is sort of the clarity that is required or desired?
I would give all Arabs in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, residency. I would make it that Israeli Arabs from here on end would gain residency and only a pathway to citizenship if they so proved loyalty to a Jewish state of Israel. I would make Jordan, which is Palestine de facto, into the Palestine that everybody's talking about. We'll call it the Democratic Republic of Jordanian Palestinians, or whatever it's called. And I would make them, even the ones here, regain their citizenship that was lost in 1988. I would give them their Jordanian citizenship, stay here as residents, but have your voting or nationality state be Jordan, which is the original Palestine, which was actually Jewish land. That was the original two-state solution, which was the British, cut away a huge chunk of our land and gave it to this Hashemite, total colonialist puppet that was placed in there. So I would do that. I would make it that Israeli Arabs or other Arabs that want citizenship would have to go through a process of proving loyalty. That's the way I would deal with that right there. I would also strengthen very much the Abraham Accords, which is what a person like me, being a nationalist, believes is the future, which is national states getting along. And so therefore I would be a strong Jewish state surrounded by strong Arab states working in concert. I would ally with Saudi Arabia against Iran. I would make Israel to be the local defense contractor in this region for Greece, for Saudi Arabia, for the UAE. I would patrol all the way around the Gulf. I would make my navy much bigger. I would patrol the whole Horn, all the way to the Persian Gulf. And I would create rail systems throughout the Middle East like the Turks did. So from Istanbul, that connects to the European rail, to Istanbul, all the way, fine, that was great. I can, and I would bring it down to Alexandria and down to, Amman and Riyadh and then to the Gulf states. And, I would make this region the Abrahamic region. That's what I would call it. Maybe that's really what I would call the region. I would call it the Abrahamic region, not the Middle East and not the Western Asia, or whatever it is. I would call it, the Abrahamic region. I would build up tourism, businesses, a lot of air conditioning, and the fastest growing cities in America are Las Vegas and Phoenix. They're desert cities, a harsher desert than our desert. Air conditioning is very important. Rail is important. And I would make it into a touristic, ancient visitation place. I would make the Bible more important as something for a heritage for the world. And I would have museums of the Bible and teach the Bible, teach Abraham. I would make this place one of the most beautiful sites. People would come here and be awed by this beautiful city. I would rebuild all these broken buildings and just make it, and Arabs that want to live here will be wealthy, successful with upward mobility. They'll be proud, Muslims, Arabs, maybe even Palestinians, but they would respect the state of Israel. And I would see this whole region flourish. Of course, I would crush, along with the Saudis and other people, I would crush the jihadist instincts around here and kind of suppress that type of thinking and push up people who want normalization and a successful region.
I do want to know what you thought of my discussion with Tel Aviv University International students. So write me an email, yishai@yishaifleisher.com. Stay tuned, stay strong, stay connected. Toda rabah, and shalom.